Hi guys, this is Miss Raina here at C347 at MacArthur High School, talking to you today about wetlands. So we're going to talk about wetlands on the inside of a continent, and then we'll talk about wetlands on the outside of a continent, um, and the beaches, right, basically on the edges of a continent. So inland wetlands are what we're going to talk about first. They act like sponges. This is what helps us to avoid floods. This is what helps us to store water so that during a drier period of the year we still have flow in creeks and rivers and sometimes in aquifers later on. Got a nice variety of wildlife habitats here, and so let's have a look at some of the wetlands that we can have inland. So a marsh is what we have like here in San Antonio. Sometimes areas of McAllister Park get temporarily flooded. We'll have some of these sometimes next to a river or a lake. A swamp is permanently covered with water, so different from a marsh in that way. Hardwood bottomland forests can kind of like serve in the same capacity as these other wetlands because it's got lots and lots of plant life that will soak up lots of extra water. Prairie potholes happen where the land is really, really, really flat, except for these small depressions. And what ends up happening here, lots of nutrition collects here when the water collects here, and this is really, really great duck hunting area because the ducks all gather up there. This is not here to be morbid, it's here to make a point that what happens in a lot of these wetlands is you have an area that's really, really, really high in nutrition, but almost devoid of oxygen. And so decomposition happens really, really, really slowly. In this example of a peat moss bog, this human specimen was really, really well preserved because that decomposition happens so slowly. Um, so you guys need to make sure you remember that wetlands have lots and lots and lots of utility. Write all of these down. You can pause the video if you like. But they can serve in all of these capacities and be really valuable natural resources. Um, Historically, there's a little bit of a fight over wetlands because it's nice, flat, fertile land, but it's also land that tends to flood. So there can be controversy over, well, should we clear it so that we can use it, or should we leave it alone so it can provide a habitat and do all of its other functions? And you can imagine there are people on both sides that feel really strongly about it. Here's an example of an estuary, and this is where the river meets the ocean. And it's a really neat, really unique environment because you have mixing every time the tide goes in and out. There are organisms out here in the ocean that really can't handle the river water. There are organisms here in the river that really can't handle the ocean water, but those who can handle an in-between environment live here. And so what happens a lot of times is this really, really nutrient-rich environment serves as a nursery for big marine animals that want to come in here and leave their young, swim back out, and there's a little bit of protection from predators, from organisms that would otherwise kill them and eat them. So here's one example, a salt marsh, very little oxygen because there's so much nutrition. Bacteria comes in and algae comes in and takes over. So decay happens really, really slowly. This is where you go and find lots of yummy shrimp, crabs, shellfish, crawfish, all of those bottom feeders, those benthic organisms. Mangrove forests are the neatest places in the world. These amazing trees that shoot their roots into the water and create all kinds of really nice habitat in here. They can happen in tropical areas. There's too much nutrition in this water for coral reefs to grow, but you can still have lots and lots of biodiversity in those kinds of areas. It's one of the reasons why estuaries can be so important because they can do a lot to treat our wastewater so that the water doesn't go out into the ocean and wreak havoc because it's got so much nutrition and will attract so much bacteria and algae. You can make lots and lots of money off of recreation in those areas. Lots of fishing is done out in those areas. On the other hand, if you clear it for farmland, you don't get the same kind of revenue. So it's some important things to keep in mind. The Everglades is an interesting case study. So what people are trying to do in the Everglades is to restore some of the damage that has been done by human impact, and in doing that, we're trying to combat a lot of this negative human impact that we've had. So everything from displacing or killing off animals because they've lost their habitat, to changing the volumes of water that have been there, to putting too much nutrition in that water because we use lots of fertilizers upriver. What happens when you have too much nutrition? Well, you get too much bacteria and algae, and you end up with basically stinky water and poisonous places to swim and poisonous drinking water. Um, what happened in Florida? Well, cities got bigger, they needed more fresh water to drink, and they've been draining some of these areas. Also, they needed more places to inhabit. So what we're trying to do now is to put the water back in those areas, put the organisms back in those areas, and restore the Everglades back to what they were. In some places, you can write a law so that you can federally protect it. In some cases, you try just to get it back to functioning. In other cases, you try to get back to the way it was before. So this is what's going to be covered on your wetlands quiz. Thank you for sticking with me, and we'll see you tomorrow in class.